Hi St George's, Mrs Collymore here with your next homeschool history quiz. Now the quiz today is all about something that we are commemorating in history this week. I wonder if you know what it is. So today is the 7th of May, it's Thursday, and tomorrow the 8th of May, we are remembering a big event in history. I wonder if you know what it is. I'm going to give you a little clue. So here we go. We've got soldiers, people celebrating, we've got a 75, we've got a Union Jack, the British flag. I wonder if you know. So I'll tell you. It is 75 years tomorrow since VE Day. I wonder if you know what VE stands for. It stands for Victory in Europe. So this is all to do with the Second World War. And 75 years ago tomorrow, we celebrated Victory in Europe. So that meant that the war in Europe was finished. It wasn't the end of the Second World War completely, but it was the end of the war in Europe. So 1945, 75 years ago. So let's have a little look at World War II. Some of you will know a lot about World War II already because you studied it in school. But in 1939, this man here, Adolf Hitler, had started to invade other countries other than Germany. He was the president of Germany, but he'd started taking over other countries. And other countries around the world realized that this was not okay and he couldn't do that and they needed to stop him. And that's what started the Second World War. So other countries came together. We called them the Allied forces. They came together to fight against Germany to stop Hitler from taking over the world. And by 1945, the Allies had started to push back and take back the countries. So in 1945 in April, Berlin, you can see Berlin on the map there, Berlin had been completely surrounded and Hitler realized that he wasn't going to be able to win the war and he killed himself. So when that happened, there was a new president in charge of Germany. His name was Dönitz. And he realized that he was going to have to try and negotiate a surrender because the war needed to end. So he started talking to the Allied forces. Now, this man here was the Supreme Allied Commander. His name was General Eisenhower. And he worked with Dönitz to agree the surrender. And on the 7th of May, 1945, which is 75 years ago today, he signed a document to say that, yes, Germany could surrender and the war would be over. Now, his headquarters were in France, in a place called Reims. Now, it looks like Reims when you see it written down, but if you're pronouncing it in French, it's Reims. And he was there and he signed that agreement that meant that the war in Europe was over because Germany had surrendered. So it starts on the 7th of May. We've just talked about the fact that General Eisenhower signed the agreement on the 7th of May. Then it was decided that there would be a celebration on the 8th of May. So on the evening of the 7th of May, the BBC interrupted their news programmes to tell everybody that the next day, the 8th of May, was going to be a national holiday and everybody was going to have a day off to celebrate the end of the war in Europe. People had mixed feelings about it because there was still a war going on in Japan and people were still fighting with the Japanese. So the war wasn't over everywhere and some people still had loved ones over in Japan fighting over there. But it was still something to celebrate. So everybody got the day off work on the 8th of May. But some countries celebrated on the 9th of May because of the time difference. So if you lived in New Zealand, you didn't celebrate VE Day until the 9th of May. But everybody knew that they could have the day off, they could have street parties, they could celebrate and be with their loved ones. Now, these are two important people at this time in the Second World War. So you might have heard of Winston Churchill. He was the Prime Minister of England. And he came out onto his balcony and on VE Day he made a speech at 3 o'clock in the afternoon to the British people telling them about the war being over in Europe. And the other people in this other picture, I wonder if you know who any of those people are. So you can see Winston Churchill again in the middle, the Prime Minister, and then you've got the Queen and you've got the king. This is King George VI. And then on either side, you've got two young girls, and this was the king and queen's daughters. So the girl in the uniform was Princess Elizabeth, and the other girl is Princess Margaret. They were sisters. Now, some of you might be able to work out that Princess Elizabeth in the uniform is now our queen. So they are the daughters of King George VI, and because she was the oldest daughter, she became queen when he died. So that is our queen there. So our queen, who's still alive today, was there on VE Day celebrating. And Winston Churchill made sure that everybody was going to have a good celebration. He called the Ministry of Food and made sure that there was going to be enough beer so that everybody could celebrate. And he also made sure that people could buy red, white, and blue bunting. That's like flags, material for flags, that they could buy those without needing to use their ration coupons. Because during the Second World War, lots of things you couldn't get, a bit like we've had in lockdown at the beginning of lockdown, and you couldn't get things, so you were rationed. You could only have so much of them, and people had coupons to spend. But he made sure that people would be able to get their red, white, and blue, the colours of the British flag, and he made sure that there would be enough beer so that people could celebrate. And during the day on VE Day, the king and queen came out onto their balcony at Buckingham Palace 8 times because there were so many people in the Mall wanting to celebrate with them. They had to keep coming back onto their balcony to wave at all of the public. And they did that 8 times during the day. And Winston Churchill joined them for one of those times. And the princesses came out, but the last time in the evening, the princesses weren't there. And later people found out that the princesses had been allowed to go out into the Mall with the people and celebrate with the people. They had to be anonymous because you couldn't have the princesses out and people knew who they were. So they snuck out into the streets with everybody and celebrated. And the Queen wrote later, "We stood outside and shouted, 'We want the king.' I think it was one of the most memorable nights of my life." That's from our Queen because she was there. And there were celebrations, there were services at church. St. Paul's Cathedral in London had 10 services that day, services to say thank you to God and to celebrate peace. And thousands of people went to each service, and they did 10 in the day. And people filled the streets and had parties and tea parties. It was a really happy day. So I'm going to show you some pictures of VE Day celebrations. You can see all of these people in the van. They look really happy, don't they? And then I wonder if you can work out where these people are. They are in the fountains at Trafalgar Square, just up the road in London. And this is Piccadilly Circus. Now, Piccadilly Circus is usually busy, but not this busy. This is really busy. I wonder if after lockdown we'll have celebrations like this. And then look at these little children celebrating. They've got their Union Jack flags. You can see it looks like they're standing on bricks and rubble. That's because in the Second World War, lots of London got bombed and lots of things got knocked down. And you can see they're standing in the rubble there, but still happy because it was the end of the war. Now, like I said, tomorrow is the 8th of May, and we are commemorating, we're remembering VE Day. So 75 years ago, tomorrow was the day that everybody had off and had street parties and celebrations. We should have been off school. If we'd been at school normally, tomorrow we would have been off school for the day to have a celebration, and people would have had street parties and celebrated, but it's a little bit different because of lockdown. But things are still going to happen. So at 3 o'clock tomorrow afternoon, they're going to play Winston Churchill's speech that he gave on VE Day. And then at 9 o'clock tomorrow night, our Queen is going to speak to us, and she's going to say some things about VE Day. I wonder if she'll say about sneaking out into the streets to celebrate with people. But it will be so lovely to see what she says because she's been there and she can remember it. And people will still have tea parties. They'll be socially distanced tea parties, but people will still celebrate. So if you've got some cake in your house or some biscuits, you could have a little celebration. And there'll be things to watch on the television. And you'll definitely hear a song called "We'll Meet Again," which was a very, very famous song in wartime. And the words are really lovely. So if you hear that song, have a listen to the words because it's a really special song. So quiz time, let's see if you were listening. When did the UK celebrate VE Day? I wonder if you can remember the date. Question 2, what was the name of the Prime Minister on VE Day? Question 3, who was King of England on VE Day? Question 4, where was the peace treaty signed? And don't say at the bottom. That's what my dad always says when we talk about the Magna Carta. He says at the bottom, it was signed at the bottom. But I want to know the place where the peace treaty was signed. And last question, why was this not the end of the Second World War? So it was the end of the war in Europe, but not the end of the Second World War. So pause the video if you want to have a little think about your answers. And I will tell you the answers now. So when did the UK celebrate VE Day? It was on the 8th of May. I wonder if you can remember why some countries celebrated on the 9th of May. What was the name of the Prime Minister on VE Day? That was Winston Churchill. Who was King of England on VE Day? King George VI. Where was the peace treaty signed? It was a place called Reims in France, or France. And why was this not the end of the Second World War? Because the war was still being fought with Japan. And that part of the war didn't finish until August 1945. And that's when the whole of the Second World War was over. Well done if you got 5 out of 5. If you didn't, well done for trying. And I hope you've learned something new. And I hope you enjoy celebrating VE Day tomorrow with your family. Take care. We'll see you soon. Bye.